Today, in a world where we have the Canon R5 and R6, we are revisiting the Canon 5D Mark III. What are the pros and the cons, and how does it stack up after 8 years since it was released? We'll have a quick look at the specs for photos and videos, we'll talk about real-world use, and ultimately, if the 5D Mark III is something that you might want to invest in. The 5D Mark III was the camera that really helped me to build my wedding videography business back in 2015. I've also used it extensively on corporate video projects across the world, and until quite recently, it was still my B cam for corporate interviews alongside my 5D Mark IV. But ever since I picked up the EOS R, my poor 5D Mark III has been sitting in a cupboard. But I still get a lot of people asking me questions about this camera, particularly from those of you who are looking to step into the world of full frame photography and want a good deal on a proven, robust camera system. So the first interesting thing about the 5D Mark III is its sensor. It's a 22 megapixel full frame sensor that gives you impressive low light performance at high ISOs, which range from 100 to 25,600, and 3 boosted ISO values of 50, 51,200 and 102,400. And this is no doubt one of the single biggest reasons that most people might be looking at investing in the 5D Mark III nowadays, and that's for the full frame sensor. And if you haven't made the switch from crop frame to full frame yet, I can say that you won't be disappointed. I noticed the quality of my work increased massively for wedding videography and photography, particularly when shooting in the evenings. Now the 5D Mark III runs on the dated Digic 5 Plus processor, bearing in mind that the Canon R5 is currently running the much newer Digic X processor. But although it's old in this department, what you need to remember is that the camera lacks a number of different modern functions like the dual pixel autofocus and touchscreen, and these require more processing power, and so I doubt that you'll notice any real issues with speed when using the functions that were designed to work with the camera and its processor. Ergonomic wise, you have a durable magnesium alloy and weather sealed body, and I've personally taken this camera out in pretty heavy rain in the past and haven't had any problems with it at all. Bear in mind that the 5D Mark III also weighs in at a heavy 950 grams, which can really start to weigh down your back and your shoulders on a long shoot day, especially when you compare it to the much lighter mirrorless EOS R. For connectivity, there's a USB 2.0 port for your data transfers, which again is quite dated, as well as a mini HDMI port for connecting to a compatible HD display. Unlike more modern cameras, there is no native wireless connection, but there are ports to add a Wi-Fi and GPS unit, but again, you need to find these and pay an additional cost. When it comes to photography, the 5D Mark III is still the first choice for a lot of professionals, and I'm talking about wedding photographers, real estate photographers, corporate photographers. There is still an army of 5D Mark III professionals out there using this camera and various lenses day to day to make a living and run a business. And it's not difficult to see why. Being able to shoot raw, full-frame images makes editing your pictures in Photoshop or Lightroom a real joy. With a dynamic range of 11.7 EV, you really do retain a lot of the details in your shadows and highlights. You also have 61 autofocus points, 41 of which are the cross type, which is on par with the more modern 5D Mark IV. And again, it's really simple to move across up and down to select the points that you want. And you can shoot at a continuous rate of 6 frames per second, which by today's standard is not very impressive, But this is an 8-year-old camera. Of course, the 5D Mark III is a DSLR camera, so you have an optical viewfinder, which is great if you currently use a crop frame DSLR. Battery life is marked at 950 shots per battery, which is very good when compared to more modern mirrorless cameras like the M50, which is only rated for 235 shots per battery when using the LCD screen. And also you have that familiar Canon menu system, so if you're coming from using a Canon DSLR or mirrorless camera, you will no doubt be familiar with this menu layout. Another major selling point that favors the 5D Mark III for professionals is the storage capacity. There are 2 memory card slots, one for your compact flash type cards and the other one for regular SD cards. And you can back up your shots across both of your cards, giving you that extra peace of mind that your client's priceless wedding photos or corporate event shots are safe and sound. While the 5D Mark III wasn't specifically built for sports and action photography, it still does a decent job in that area. It locks onto your subject very quickly and mostly tracks it well, even while shooting a burst of images, with probably just 1 or 2 soft photos in the end. Just don't forget to switch to the AI servo mode before attempting any of these shots. Something else that you might find useful on the 5D Mark III is the inbuilt HDR mode. So when you press the shutter button, the camera takes 3 shots in a row, 1 correctly exposed, 1 underexposed, and 1 overexposed, and then it combines all of these into one image. And of course, this is really useful to avoid blown out areas in your photos, like when you're shooting inside next to windows or when there might be strong sunlight in certain parts of your picture. So how about using it for video? Well, as mentioned earlier, I have used this camera a lot in the past for corporate videography, and it really helped me to improve and build my small wedding video business a few years ago. But how does it stack up against modern DSLR and mirrorless cameras? Well, the maximum video resolution tops out at 1080p with a frame rate of 30 frames per second and is recorded in a H.264 format. There's no native 4K option, no C-Log option, and you can only film 60 FPS at 720p. Now, compared to modern cameras, these video settings might seem pretty abysmal, but the 5D Mark III does have an ace up its sleeve, and this comes in the form of Magic Lantern. The Magic Lantern software gives you the ability to shoot RAW at near 4K quality, making this camera a favorite for indie filmmakers. Now, I personally have never used it on the 5D Mark III, and I have heard that the output files can be difficult to deal with, so don't expect an easy ride in this area. When it comes to video, you do have the all-eye compression mode, which gives you much better image quality because it treats each individual frame independently during the compression. But of course, this will require much more memory. Now, I've had a few people ask me about the possibility of upgrading to this full-frame camera to improve their vlogging content. I think I've tried vlogging with the 5D Mark III once or twice in the past, and because of the lack of flip screen, dual pixel autofocus, and eye tracking, I found it incredibly difficult to keep my face in focus. And if you check out some of my earlier videos, you will notice that they're not always completely in focus, and that's because I tried to film them on the 5D Mark III. I mean, it's not impossible, but it is a very fiddly affair, and you might end up with lots of content that you spend ages filming that's all out of focus. However, if you have someone filming for you, then it's definitely a good option. Even with the lack of 4K, the 1080 is so clean that you can actually upscale it to 4K in post, and most people won't notice. So how much will a 5D Mark III set you back today? Well, currently they're selling on eBay for around £600 to £800 in the UK, around $800 to $1,000 in the US, and this is very dependent on the condition and any accessories that you might get with it. So is this camera for you? Should you consider getting a 5D Mark III? Well, as I always say, it depends on what you are actually planning on using it for. If you're looking to upgrade from an older APS-C camera to a full frame sensor for photography, and you can't quite afford a 5D Mark IV or an EOS R yet, then yes, the 5D Mark III is a great option for you. Having the 5D Mark III as your main camera for your photography work, again, is a great option. And like I said before, there are many professionals that are out there still using this camera as their main camera body for their wedding and corporate photography work. However, if you want a new vlogging camera and you're thinking about the full frame 5D Mark III as an option, then I would have to say probably not. This isn't necessarily the right camera for you. As mentioned before, I used this camera for professional video work in the past, but after using the 5D Mark IV and the EOS R now, having C-Log, dual pixel autofocus, the native 4K option, I'm much more inclined not to use the 5D Mark III today for video. Maybe as a B cam or maybe even as a C cam. But saying that, if you want to get a full frame camera for your indie short films and you want to experiment with Magic Lantern, then yes, I would say the 5D Mark III is a good option for those types of projects. So what are your thoughts on the aging 5D Mark III? Let me know down in the comment section below. If you haven't done so already, guys, do consider subscribing to the YouTube channel and hitting that little bell for notifications. So that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. All that's left to say is stay creative, stay safe, imagine, implement, and inspire, and I'll see you next time on KaiCreative.